Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Phil Bennett, Commercial Director for the Digital Railway Programme for the rail industry. And it really is a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the Digital Railway Programme, and in particular how we're using NEC4 as a backbone of our contract suite to actually deliver this in a very different way to we have done historically for works of this type in the industry. But actually, before I talk about the way we're delivering, let's talk a little bit about what Network Rail does, just as a quick reminder, and indeed Digital Railway. So, what do we do at Network Rail? Well, as you probably know, we own, operate and develop Britain's railway infrastructure. And that's over 20,000 miles of track, 30,000 bridges and other structures, and tens of thousands of signals, level crossings and stations. We also run the 20 largest and busiest stations in the country, with the other 2,500 being run by the train operating companies. To put some numbers around that, that's 4.7 million passenger journeys per day, together with 600 plus freight trains. No doubt a number of you actually travelled on trains either to and from this event today. And in our role as delivering a safe and reliable railway, we also have to carefully manage the thousands of projects that are undertaken every year to upgrade and continue to enhance the railway infrastructure. And you can see there just some of the numbers as to what that means in terms of real-term improvements to the railway. Why are we doing that? Because we continue to boom. Passenger numbers have doubled in the last 20 years and are forecast to continue to do so. So that means a railway that is growing every day. And indeed, there's over 1 million extra services running this year than there was just a few years ago. And here's where Digital Railway starts to come in. It's part of the way that we can deliver improved passenger and freight customer services by building improved reliability, improved capacity, reduced journey times. And we do that within Digital Railway by introducing the next generation of train control systems. So that's removing traditional line-side signals, lights on sticks on the side of the railway, and replacing within cab signal systems, where information goes direct to the train driver. Those systems also enable trains to operate within safe limits and speeds, and they ensure that we also have not only improved passenger safety, but also improved safety for those working on the railway, actually maintaining and enhancing it. So what about Digital Railway? What is it? Well, first and foremost, it's a cross-industry programme. Yes, it's about delivering some improved and new technologies. I'll talk about those in a second. But actually, at its heart, it's about changing the way that the railway works and operates. And the railway is a complex system of systems. So to make that change happen, it's about every part of the railway coming together. So we have to change, we have to continue meeting those increasing demands. But why now? Why not wait? Well, actually, timing is quite critical. We need to modernise our railways and build that foundation for a better performing and safer network. And with a typical lifespan of a signalling control system of around about 35 years, if we don't act now, we lose that opportunity for the next generation. And therefore, the decision has been taken that from CP6, the start of our control period that commenced in April of this year, all schemes will either be Digital Railway from the off, or as a minimum will be enabled by Digital Railway ready specifications to make the transition in the future easier. Now, to realise this change, yes, there's some technology, but a number of other elements and capabilities have to come together. First and foremost, the industry needs to develop its skills, capability, and actually enable that business change and that industry change that's going to happen. We then need some technology systems to make sure we have safe separation of trains. And this is where, in the digital world, a system called ETCS, or European Train Control System, comes in. Alongside that, we have tools to help and manage the traffic flows. So things called traffic management that actually aid our signallers and maximise the throughput of trains through any piece of infrastructure, in particular at times of disruption. We have some systems that support effective train movement control. People will talk about systems such as CNAS or ATO. And these are systems that are around providing our train drivers with decision support, so make sure they have the most up-to-date information to make the right decisions at the right time. ATO, as we progress through time, will increasingly automate some of these processes. But to connect all these systems together, to connect this information together, we also need a robust platform of telecommunications networks, both fixed and mobile, and they also form part of the digital railway environment. So digital railway isn't just one thing. It doesn't just deliver a single benefit. Indeed, the combination of benefits that you get are tailored based on the combinations of those systems that you deploy on a given scheme and a given project to solve a particular problem. But it also isn't just about Network Rail, far, far from it. At its heart, it is a cross-industry programme. It's about the train operating companies, the freight operating companies, the supply chain, the DFT, government, and Network Rail coming together to bring that whole industry transformation for a better railway. So our digital railway programme is all around enabling those end-user benefits. And what you can see on screen at the moment shows how those benefits align to Network Rail's priorities for CP6. And we play against every one of those priority areas. So you might be forgiven for thinking, as I stand here today, that actually digital railway is something that is about to commence or something for the future. That would be wrong. It's actually something that is already happening here and now. And you can see a summary of the schemes that are either in development and delivery as we speak, or indeed in 2 or 3 examples have actually been delivered. You may have travelled on some of those pieces of infrastructure yourselves already. So if that's the purpose, need and opportunity for the digital railway, how do we go about best delivering that on behalf of the industry and indeed the country? Well, our digital railway delivery approach is founded on some simple yet key principles. Create the right relationships with the right suppliers. And we believe that's a relationship founded on collaboration, commitment, shared risk and reward for successfully achieving outcomes. And I'll come back to that theme of outcomes over the next few minutes. It's about getting the right suppliers with the right capabilities at the right stage, the right timing. It's about taking a whole life approach. Ian talked about that earlier on, that we should move more to that model, and indeed we are doing. And it's about, most importantly, allowing suppliers to what they do well. Optimise solutions and innovate to ensure effective delivery. But this isn't a strategy that we dreamt up, or I dreamt up in isolation. This is a strategy that was developed very much in conjunction with suppliers. And we held a number of initiatives and forums to ensure it represents a collective view of how best to effectively deliver the digital railway need. And it's importantly based on the experience of those involved, both in delivering works conventionally and in delivering these works elsewhere around the world. It builds on experience and lessons from other similar programmes across Europe, and it aligns closely to the supply market's own view and commitments in the recently published rail sector deal. But what does that then look like in reality? Well, it means collaborative contracts on occasions that are new to the rail industry. We're using NEC4 together with other forms. It's about creating long-term commitment and focusing on contracting for the end outcome. Not worrying too much about how that's achieved, but more about what is being achieved. And it's about whole-life cost-based arrangements, decisions and commitments. And these are concepts that we're using throughout the digital railway programme. It's about trying to fundamentally re-engineer the way that the relationship between the client and the supply chain works. And that means creating new commercial constructs, making sure more power rests with the supply chain, and acting as an intelligent client. Now, the diagram on screen tries to represent that graphically. In a conventional world, we tend to let the supply chain operate below that white dotted line. What we're seeking to do in the digital railway delivery world is to let them operate below the yellow dotted line. So much earlier involvement in the V as items have been developed, and a much longer term involvement throughout the life of the assets that have been delivered. The first major piece of activity that we're delivering for digital railway using this model is the East Coast Mainline Digital Railway Programme. And a number of you may actually have even been involved in the current ongoing procurements for that programme. The scope is quite complicated overall, and this is around £1 billion investment. but at its core is delivering an updated in-cab signalling system that will run from King's Cross to just north of Peterborough, together with the traffic management system and all the associated onboard train requirements and business change to make that happen. So our model, therefore, when we look at the East Coast programme, breaks down into 3 principal packages. Now, all of these are based around long-term commitment, collaborative contracting. The one I want to focus on now, though, is actually the cornerstone of this. And this is our train control partnership. Now, this is an 8-year framework contract that utilises NEC4 contract forms. We have a PSC contract form for early stage development work, and then we move into using a DBO form for the actual design, build and operate throughout the whole of the asset life of a signalling systems. The estimated overall value over the full life of those contracts is some £900 million. So why use the NEC4? Well, there are many reasons we could have focused on. Most importantly, the contract we selected needed to set the right environment. It needed to signal a message of change about the way we wish to behave and engage with the supply chain and deliver projects. It needed to support that design, build and then maintain approach. It also, though, needed to drive collaborative relationships. And that includes obviously such items as joint and integrated teams. And it needed to facilitate non-conventional contracting mechanisms such as target costing. And we believe that NEC4 was the form that most fitted the bill most readily. It was really important that we did want to make a clear statement of intent to our stakeholders, both internally and externally in the industry, that our goal was to work collaboratively. Early market engagement with the supply chain when we were developing our strategy also highlighted a large element of the supply chain who favoured the NEC suite of contracts. And we also, it's worth highlighting, wanted to make sure and encourage positive contract administration. Make sure that we tackled challenges on what inevitably are going to occur on complex projects as they happened and not store problems for the future. And also, I'd like to highlight the fact that NR, in the way it's chosen to deploy NEC4 around these contracts, has tried to shy away from making large numbers of changes to the clauses and the conditions, something that's been talked about this morning already. And indeed, we have a few Z clauses, but they are minimal. And what we haven't done is to seek to change the risk allocations or indeed the compensation events. We believe it's key that they remain unchanged to stick true to the philosophy of NEC. Now, the key to the effectiveness of these arrangements, though, is getting the right people with the right behaviours and capability. The contracts themselves create the relationship and enable that environment, but it's the people that make it work. And therefore, we place significant time and effort into selecting the right partners at every stage of the process. We started with a fairly conventional pre-qualification phase, where we focused on competency, capacity, capability. And this was really about filtering the supply chain who were interested in working with us to those who were actually showing they were capable of delivering what was required. Moving into the ITT stage, we started to focus much more around picking the best and most appropriate supplier from those that had shown they were capable. We used a 2-stage ITT process. The first stage focusing very much on corporate and individual behaviours and capability to work collaboratively as well as technically. And then as we moved into stage 2, by which time we had just 2 suppliers remaining in the selection process, we focused on effective value for money via a series of whole life cost submissions and models. Throughout the process, the engagement with the market was a constant, and we held open launch events at each stage of the process to make sure that the messaging, the way we wish the contracts to be utilised, and indeed to make sure that suppliers had opportunity to question that. Our ongoing commitment throughout the selection process to non-commercial elements is to be highlighted. And in each stage of the process, we always made sure these were included. And when we came into, for example, thinking about the right behaviours, this included such items as corporate interviews that were subsequently challenged with real-life project visits to ensure that what was being said was actually been lived and breathed by the bidding organisations. Team assessments of proposed teams, interviews with proposed key personnel, as well as written submissions and experience analysis. So all of this was to enable that we could move from a journey where we are today with delivering signalling works on the railway, where it's often quite siloed and it's often a hub and spoke type of agreement, to a much more collaborative engagement with everyone working together. So having set the right environment with the use of NEC4, got the right delivery collaborative strategy, and selected the right suppliers, of course you need the right mechanisms and environment from within the contract itself to drive that success on an ongoing basis. We have a number of levers within the arrangements we've set up to do this, and I'll focus on just a few. We have a memorandum of understanding developed by the successful suppliers themselves to bring all three of those key partners together to an aligned way of working collaboratively. We have co-located offices. We have electronic contract management systems to facilitate effective contract administration. We have joint training provided on the contracts themselves to ensure that everybody is working to a common philosophy. But it's also, of course, the way you actually use the contracts in anger. So we have outcome scopes with plenty of space for ECI, for the supply chain to really be able to deliver extra value. Early target cost setting, as early as we can in the process with sufficient definition on scope, schedule and risk. We have appropriate risk transfer, only looking to transfer risk across to the supply chain when they have an ability to fairly manage and mitigate that risk. And we have mutually defined and agreed KPIs and thresholds for performance delivery, as well as non-confrontational governance and dispute resolution built into that framework agreement. One of the things I've talked about is the move to using outcomes in the way that we've chosen to deliver here, and this is a cornerstone. And we do mean outcomes, not outputs. So when I talk about outcomes, I'm talking about things like the number of trains per hour through a given piece of infrastructure. I'm talking about the system availability of the systems that have been installed, focusing on what is being achieved as an outcome for the business, not how it's been achieved. That hasn't been without its challenges. Probably the biggest one is we've not done this before in the industry. And that's meant it's been quite a steep learning curve. It's required a step change in behaviours and culture, most importantly from the client. I think there's a big emphasis when people talk about contracting strategies and change to think only of the supply chain. And change is required there, but in my experience, more so with client organisations as well. We need to create and build trust in an environment and an industry when at times that always doesn't exist. And defining what is needed in outcome terms is actually incredibly challenging. Traditionally as a client, certainly as a Network Rail, as a rail client, we tend to think in solution mode. And we need to step away from that and think in terms of the complex outcomes we seek to achieve. And then we need to find ways of defining and setting appropriate KPIs and success measures so we can monitor and ensure that those outcomes have been achieved. Often these are areas that have not been measured before. And again, within the rail industry, it can be quite a complex environment with complex interaction between Network Rail, train operators, and other members of the industry. So setting those definitions and measuring those outcomes is not easy, and has proven to be a challenge. So, as I draw to an end, a couple of takeaways. Digital railway is a key opportunity for the rail industry at all levels and enables that necessary transformation if we're going to continue to meet those increasing demands and expectations on the industry. In order to do that, having the appropriate relationship and contract is a key enabler. And we believe that the NEC4 suite that we've chosen to utilise supports creating that right relationship. Thank you.